Noticed your note said Nan. Not sure if that was a typo or an additional instruction you meant to include. I'll proceed based on everything else specified, but let me know if there was something more you wanted to add. I didn't say a word. That's the part nobody believes when I tell this story. They expect me to say I confronted him right there, or that I grabbed my son-in-law by the collar in front of everyone. But I didn't. I just stood at the edge of the hallway, holding 2 plates of food I'd gone to get for my wife and me, and I watched my daughter's rehearsal dinner the night before her wedding. The venue was a converted farmhouse about 40 minutes outside of Chattanooga. Her choice always had a thing for old wood and string lights. 60-something people packed into a room that smelled like cedar and warm bread. My wife had been on her feet for 3 days straight helping coordinate everything. I'd driven down from Knoxville with a trunk full of table decorations and a heart full of something I couldn't quite name yet. That particular kind of happiness a father feels when he knows his daughter has found someone good. That's what I thought. That she'd found someone good. His name was Fowler. That's what everyone called him. Not his first name, just Fowler. He was 34, worked in commercial real estate, had a firm handshake and a way of looking you in the eye that made you feel like the only person in the room. My daughter had been with him 3 years. I'd watched him fix her car without being asked. I'd watched him sit with me through a rain delay at a baseball game without checking his phone once. I thought I knew the measure of a man. I was carrying 2 plates of pulled pork and cornbread back from the buffet when I turned the corner near the coat room. The door was mostly closed, but not fully. I saw them through the gap. Fowler. And a woman I recognized. One of my daughter's college friends, a bridesmaid named Wren. She'd flown in from Seattle 2 days ago. She'd hugged my daughter at the airport and cried. They weren't talking. I stood there for what felt like a full minute but was probably 4 seconds. Then I turned around and walked back to the buffet table and set both plates down very carefully. Because my hands had started shaking and I didn't want to drop them. My wife found me there a few minutes later. She knew something was wrong immediately. 41 years of marriage will do that. She put her hand on my arm and said my name the way she does when she's asking a question, without asking it out loud. I told her we needed to step outside. The night air was cold for September. We stood by a stone wall at the edge of the parking lot, and I told her what I'd seen. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she said very quietly that we needed to think before we did anything. I wanted to go back inside and find Fowler and tell him exactly what kind of man he was. I wanted to walk into that rehearsal dinner and pull my daughter aside and save her from what was coming. I'd spent 38 years being her father. Every instinct I had was pointed in that direction. My wife said, if you do that tonight, you will wreck her rehearsal dinner and possibly her memory of her own wedding. And she might not even believe you. I knew she was right. I hated that she was right. We went back inside. I sat at a table in the corner and watched Fowler give a toast. He talked about the first time he met my daughter. He talked about the moment he knew she was the one. He looked at her with what I can only describe as a practiced sincerity. The kind that looks real until you've seen the other side of it. My daughter was glowing. She looked happier than I'd ever seen her. I held my wife's hand under the table and said nothing. That night at the hotel, I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark and went over it again and again, asking myself if I'd misread it. Maybe it was something innocent. Maybe I hadn't seen what I thought I saw. My wife was asleep beside me, and I stared at the ceiling and tried to find an explanation that didn't break everything. By 3 in the morning, I'd stopped looking for one. The wedding was at 4 the next afternoon. I've been asked since then how I got through the ceremony, how I stood in the front row and watched my daughter walk down the aisle and didn't say anything. I don't have a clean answer. You find a compartment somewhere deep in yourself and you put the thing in it and you close the door. You do it because the alternative is worse. You do it because your daughter is radiant and she's walking toward what she believes is the rest of her life, and she doesn't know yet what you know. And maybe you still tell yourself, maybe there is a way through this that doesn't destroy her. The reception was at the same venue. More lights, more people, a band that played Motown and old country. My wife and I danced once, slowly, and she kept her hand pressed flat against my chest like she was trying to hold something in place. Wren was at table 7. She gave a bridesmaid speech that made half the room cry. She talked about my daughter's loyalty, her generosity, what a gift it was to have a friend like her. I watched Fowler's face while she spoke. He smiled at all the right moments. He was very good. What I didn't know, what I had no way of knowing, was that someone else in that room had seen something too. My daughter had an older cousin on her mother's side, a woman named June. June was 59. Quiet. The kind of person who observes more than she speaks. She'd known my daughter since she was born. She'd also, as it turned out, been in the farmhouse parking lot the previous evening. Earlier than I was, earlier than anyone, because she'd arrived ahead of schedule and spent 20 minutes on a call in her car before coming inside. She'd seen Fowler and Wren arrive together. Not arrive at the same time. Together. Same car. His car. 2 hours before the rehearsal dinner started. June and I had a brief conversation at the reception near the end of the evening. She came and sat beside me at my table while my wife was dancing with her sister, and she said, very directly, that she thought we needed to talk. She asked me if I'd noticed anything the night before. I looked at her for a moment and I told her what I'd seen. She nodded. Not surprised. She told me about the car. Then she told me something else. 3 weeks before the wedding, she'd been at a conference in Nashville. She'd seen Fowler at the hotel bar. He hadn't seen her. He was with Wren. June had assumed at the time that it was a work thing. She didn't know Wren well, hadn't placed her immediately, and she dismissed it. But when Wren arrived at the wedding and June recognized her, she'd started putting the pieces together. We sat with that for a minute. Then June said, your daughter deserves to know, but she needs to hear it right, and she needs to hear it from the right people, and she needs to hear it when she can actually take it in and not when she's still in her wedding dress. I asked her what she meant by right people. She said, she needs to hear it from you, and she needs to hear it from me, together. Because if it's just you, Fowler will find a way to make it about a father who never thought anyone was good enough for his daughter. I thought about that for a long time. My daughter and Fowler left for their honeymoon 4 days later. Costa Rica, 2 weeks. My wife and I drove home to Knoxville the morning after the wedding. I sat in the passenger seat and watched the Tennessee hills go by and felt like I was carrying something that was slowly getting heavier. My wife said, on that drive, that she was afraid I was going to act too quickly and make it worse. She said she was also afraid I was going to wait too long and make it worse a different way. She said there probably wasn't a version of this that didn't hurt our daughter, and we had to decide which kind of hurt we could live with. We decided to wait until they were back from the honeymoon. It was the longest 2 weeks of my life. My daughter called us from Costa Rica twice. She sounded happy. She talked about the ocean and a boat tour they'd taken and a restaurant where the owner had personally brought them extra dessert when he found out they were newlyweds. I listened to her voice and smiled at the right moments and told her I loved her and hung up and sat in my kitchen feeling like a fraud. June and I had spoken twice during those 2 weeks. She was methodical. She'd written down what she knew, dates and locations, organized it clearly. She'd also, quietly, reached out to a mutual friend who knew Wren, someone she trusted, and confirmed that Wren and Fowler had been seeing each other for close to a year. A year. While he was asking my daughter to marry him, while I was shaking his hand at Christmas dinners, while I was driving to Chattanooga with a trunk full of table decorations, my daughter and Fowler came home on a Tuesday. June and I had agreed that we'd give them 3 or 4 days to settle back in, and then June would reach out to my daughter and ask if she could come visit. Not a phone call. In person. My daughter lived about an hour from June. My wife and I drove down the following Saturday. June was already there when we arrived. The 4 of us sat in my daughter's living room. Fowler was at a property, showing in Murfreesboro. He'd mentioned it that morning, and we'd known about it when we chose the day. I'm not going to pretend there wasn't something deliberate about the timing. My daughter looked at the 3 of us, and she knew something was wrong before anyone said a word. She knew the way you know when your stomach drops before you've consciously understood why. She looked at me and said, "Dad." Just that. Just my name. I told her I loved her first. I said it because I needed her to know it before anything else entered the room. Then June and I told her what we knew. I'm not going to describe what my daughter's face did in those minutes, because some things are private. I'll say that she asked us to repeat certain parts. I'll say that she was very still for a long time afterward. I'll say that my wife moved to sit beside her, put an arm around her, and my daughter leaned her head against my wife's shoulder like she was 6 years old again. She asked us if we were sure. June said yes. She told her about Nashville. I told her about the coat room. June told her about the car. My daughter sat with it. She didn't cry right away. She asked one question that I think revealed more about her than anything else. She said, "How long have you known?" I told her the truth. I told her about the rehearsal dinner. I told her why we'd waited. I told her about the conversation in the parking lot, the decision not to say anything that night, the 2 weeks while she was in Costa Rica. I told her all of it. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "I need you to leave me alone for a while." We left. June and my wife and I sat in June's car in the driveway for 20 minutes without saying much. Then my daughter came to the door and waved us back in. She'd made coffee. She set 4 mugs on the kitchen table and sat down and looked at me and said, "What do I do now?" I said, "You don't have to decide anything today." She said she'd already decided. Fowler came home that evening to find my daughter, my wife, and June still in the house. He walked in through the side door the way people do when they live somewhere, comfortable and unguarded, and stopped when he saw us all at the kitchen table. I watched his face. I watched him do the calculation. My daughter stood up. She was calm in a way I hadn't expected. She told him she knew about Ren. She told him she knew about Nashville. She told him she knew about the car at the farmhouse. I expected him to deny it, to perform confusion, to look around the room for a version of the story that worked in his favor. Instead, he just went very quiet. He put his keys on the counter. He said her name once. She said, "I'd like you to leave." He looked at me. I don't know what he expected to find there. I kept my face still and looked back at him and didn't say a word. He left. That was 14 months ago. My daughter filed for divorce the following week. It was not easy. The months after were not easy. There were days she called me at 6 in the morning and I could hear in her voice that she hadn't slept. There were days she was furious, not at Fowler, not at Ren, but at herself, for not seeing it, for trusting him, for standing at an altar and saying words she'd meant completely to someone who hadn't meant them at all. I told her that wasn't the right way to look at it. I told her that believing in someone isn't a failure. I told her that the person who should feel shame in that story was not her. She's doing better now. Not all the way better. I'm not sure there's an all the way when it comes to something like this, but she's working and she's laughing again. And a few months ago she called me just to talk. Not because she was in pain, just to talk, and that felt like something. June and my daughter are closer now than they've ever been. Ren is not part of my daughter's life anymore. I don't know much about what happened between her and Fowler. I don't spend much time thinking about either of them. What I do think about, sometimes, in the quiet moments, early morning, sitting on the back porch with coffee before my wife wakes up, is that drive from Chattanooga the morning after the wedding. The Tennessee hills in the gray light. The weight of what I was carrying. I've been a father for 38 years. I've made mistakes, more than I can count, more than my daughter probably remembers, though I'm sure she remembers some. There are things I would do differently, choices I'd take back, conversations I wish I'd started sooner or ended differently, but I sat in that passenger seat and I made a decision. I would not let my daughter walk through her life with someone who would betray her. Not if I could do something about it. I would not choose my own comfort over her truth. I would not look away. I told her everything I knew. I did it with June beside me when the time was right, in the right room, without Fowler there to shape the story. I don't know if I got everything right. I know I got that part right. She called me last Sunday. Her voice was bright. She said she'd been hiking. She's been hiking a lot lately. Says that helps her think, and that she'd made it to the top of a ridge she'd been working toward for weeks, and the view had been something else. I asked her what she could see from up there. She said, everything. I've thought about that answer a few times since. The way she said it, not just describing a landscape, but something more, like she was talking about more than the mountain. I think maybe she was. I've been thinking a lot lately about what it actually costs a person to stay quiet when every part of them is screaming to act. The night I stood in that hallway at the farmhouse, holding 2 plates of food that went cold on a buffet table, I had a choice. I could have walked through that door and ended everything right there. And for a few seconds, I nearly did. Not out of cruelty, out of love, the kind that moves fast and doesn't always stop to think about the damage it leaves behind. I wanted to protect my daughter. That instinct was real. It still is. But my wife pulled me outside and said something I've turned over in my mind 100 times since, that doing the right thing and doing it well are not always the same moment. You can have the truth in your hands and still deliver it in a way that makes everything worse. Timing isn't weakness. Timing is a form of care. What Fowler did had its own logic, the logic of a person who believed he could manage 2 worlds at once, who thought charm was the same thing as character. Men like that don't think of themselves as dishonest. They think of themselves as exceptional, as people for whom ordinary rules are a kind of optional framework. That kind of thinking eventually runs into reality. It always does. Not because the universe is keeping score, but because deception is structurally unstable. It requires constant maintenance. It requires everyone around you to keep not knowing, and people, real people who love someone, tend to notice. June noticed. I noticed. Separately, without coordinating, 2 people who loved my daughter were paying attention. That's not luck. That's what happens when someone lives their life with integrity. The people around them become protective of it, almost instinctively. I think about my daughter in the months after. The early morning phone calls. The anger turned inward that I had to keep gently redirecting. She kept asking herself how she hadn't seen it. I kept telling her that question was the wrong one. The right question wasn't what she'd missed. It was what she was going to build next. With what she now knew about herself, she'd found out she could survive a betrayal that would have flattened a lot of people. That's not a small thing to learn about yourself, even if the way you learned it was brutal. There's a kind of intelligence that only comes from going through something hard and choosing not to let it make you smaller. My daughter is sharper now, not harder, sharper. She trusts more carefully. She asks better questions. She hiked to the top of a ridge a few weeks ago and called me to say she could see everything from up there. And I don't think she was only talking about the view. What I tell anyone in a situation like mine is this. The truth is almost never improved by waiting forever, but it's almost always improved by waiting a little. Get the facts straight. Bring someone else who knows. Choose the room. Choose the day. Make sure the person you love is in a position to actually receive what you're about to hand them. That's not strategy. That's respect. I'm 63 years old. I've watched people handle hard things well and handle them badly, and the difference usually isn't courage or the lack of it. The difference is almost always whether a person can hold their own pain still long enough to think about someone else's. That's the whole thing, really. That's most of what being a father is. My daughter is going to be fine. I knew it the morning she stopped asking how she missed it and started asking what was next.